This is a Renegade Media Network podcast.
Finally, the best time of the year has arrived. That would be football season. Don't roll your eyes. You got to quit focusing on the day in and day out craziness that we all focus on. Let your mind relax a little bit. If you love playing fantasy football but struggle to find maybe, the right resource to help you with your research, maybe you keep losing every season, well, I've got you covered. And by that, I mean my sponsors over at Football Insider Edge have you covered. Whether you're a season-long player focused on DraftKings or maybe FanDuel type contests, or if you just like to make the occasional wager each week on a couple of games, make a couple of dollars, the guys at Football Insider Edge provide you with the research tools and the in-depth analysis to take your game to the next level. With their proprietary model, matchup charts, and industry award-winning content, the team at Football Insider Edge have devoted themselves to educating their subscribers, how about that, helping them improve their play, and in a few special moments, which I would like to arrive at one of these moments, winning life-changing money. They are proud of the community they've built through weekly interaction on their Slack chat channel, and take great pride in helping others to achieve their goals of becoming better fantasy players. Check this out. As supporters of this show, which they are, and I guess you could say the Liberty Movement as a whole, these guys are that, they are currently offering a 20% discount on any monthly or full season plan on their website. So, of course, to get that 20% off, you need to type in Counterflow. That is your promo code that I'm giving you guys to get this 20% off over at footballinsideredge.com. Once again, footballinsideredge.com, promo code Counterflow. Do it at checkout. Take advantage of the discount offer today. Let's get to the show.
You are now listening to the Counterflow podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, the icon, the hologram graph, but I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus, but I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Counterflow podcast. Once again here, second week in a row, I bring you someone that is in the film making, I guess you can call it the industry. You know, the guys I get on here, of course, are, I suppose, a little bit of an outsider type group, right? They're certainly not in the establishment filmmaking industry. And I will say, my guest today, M.A. Taylor, I actually know M.A., and when you make documentaries like he makes, you can't actually be known by the name that your friends would call you. And so he will be known as M.A. Taylor, and he does have an IMDb page that tells you about some of the films that we're going to go over today. He's got one called The Creepy Line, which I remember seeing, I think it was on Amazon. Amazon seems to have a better selection for documentaries. He's got Safeguard, which is about the Electoral College. He's got Riding the Dragon, which is a new one about the Biden's Chinese secrets. And then, of course, he's got Clinton Cash. Everything is for sale. And I recommend all of these. I've seen them all now and enjoyed them thoroughly. Something that's really interesting about M.A. Taylor is this. Remember the big, giant case? We still hear about it. The Supreme Court case, Citizens United, also known as Citizens United versus the FEC, the Federal Election Commission. That was back in, let me see if I can look it up real quick. I think it was in 2007-ish, somewhere around there, maybe 2008, 2009. Whatever the case is, Citizens United won, and it's been known as a case where free speech ended up winning. Well, the Citizens United side, well, that included my guest today, M.A. Taylor. How about that? So he was part of that giant case when they, back then, it sprung from a movie that he was part of called Hillary, the movie. And so I got to talking with M.A. at a party, and he had a very interesting story, and we're going to get into it here with these documentaries that he's been a part of making. And just, he had it doesn't totally come across in this interview because he's nice and polished for all of my listeners, but I tell you, he definitely has a Machiavellian side to him, and he will go after these rich elites that seem to do a lot of damage to our country and to our world. At that, he is not scared. He jumps right into it. We get into all of these documentaries, why he made them, what he's got upcoming, and all of that. It's a very good conversation. M.A. Taylor's a really good guy. I really enjoyed this conversation. And now I get to actually hang out with the guy outside of just this chat. So I'm lucky to have met him. Let's bring him on right now. Director, cinematographer, editor, M.A. Taylor. Welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
Hey, great to be here. I'm fantastic.
Good. This is your first time on the show, so I want you to tell my listeners what you do. And I've had the pleasure of chatting with you quite a bit, and I don't even know how you would describe it. So I'm looking forward to this too. Describe what you do. I'd like to hear it in your words.
Well, the easiest way to explain what I do, because I get this a lot, is I am a filmmaker. I make documentaries about usually topics that are timely, topics that are happening now. Sometimes they're in the political space. Sometimes they're about people. And so they're investigative in nature. And so I would say that's primarily what I am known for. And I have also done work with a variety of other things, worked in the arts and things. But the big thing is I'm a filmmaker. I make a number of projects that people may or may not have seen that are out there as we speak. And that's the simplest way to put it.
What if I put it, because if someone said, what does your guest do? Meaning you, my first thought would be, he makes these documentaries that target some of the worst people in government.
Well, that is, it's funny because, I've been called a lot of things, a filmmaker and a propagandist and a number of things. I think it's like this, right? My fundamental philosophy is if you are running for office and you are going to represent people as a public servant, then you deserve to be vetted in the strictest way possible, right? By a whole host of people, right? If you're going to be the president, a congressman, the president of the Dog Watcher Association, and in the city, like if you are in any way connected to public funds or anything like that, you deserve to be vetted. And sometimes people will vet you through campaigns, and sometimes they will vet you like we do through movies. And so I think that in a lot of ways, what's great about a documentary is that all we're doing is talking frankly about what people are doing. And if you happen to be doing bad things, then that's what will come through in the documentary.
So let's talk about some of them. Which documentaries would my listeners know? Should my listeners know? Probably better say it that way.
Well, in the last couple of years, we've done a number of projects. The latest was a film on Joe Biden in China called Riding the Dragon with Peter Schweitzer, which evaluates basically Joe Biden's connections through Hunter Biden to China. This was released, I guess it's coming on a year now, in September of last year. Another project we did in 2018, which actually garnered a lot of success, was the Creepy Line, evaluating big tech's influence in politics. And at the time we did that project, people always knew that big tech was creepy, or Facebook was creepy, or they're watching you, or they're tracking you. But we had put forward new questions about, are they affecting elections? And this was 2 years before the 2020 presidential and beyond. And of course, one of the most infamous projects that we've done was the film Clinton Cash on the Clinton Foundation. And that film came out in 2016. And it's interesting because a lot of people have, say, oh, these films are for Republicans, it's for Republicans. But actually, Clinton Cash is not for Republicans. It's actually for Democrats. It's saying that Hillary Clinton has actually betrayed Democrats more than Republicans. And so I think that's actually an interesting place where these films exist. They're not particularly, in the partisan area. They actually hit a number of more dynamic, topics in an interesting way.
What effect do you think that Clinton Cash had on the 2016 election?
I mean, I would say I think that actually probably had a very significant effect on the election. I think that the research comes originally from Peter Schweitzer's book of the same name, Clinton Cash, which was actually published long before Hillary Clinton was announced as a candidate for the presidency. And so, I think that the film came out around the time that the DNC was basically giving her the crown. I mean, very, very likely, undercutting Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of Bernie Sanders people who felt betrayed, who actually carried the film. Because in a lot of ways, the fix was in for her the whole time. Bernie Sanders never had a chance. And so I think the film, kind of laid out things in a very basic way, because in a lot of ways, you have to look at it this way, and we're very clear to say these in these films. Some of these scenarios we don't really have full evidence for. These are just the things that exist, and you have to make up your own mind. And so I think in a lot of ways that, in the case of the Clintons, there's sometimes there's circumstantial evidence, sometimes there's this kind of evidence or that kind of evidence. But again, as a documentary, it's one of those things where we are taking the pieces that people know and putting them together. And in a lot of ways, it's up to you to decide whether there's enough evidence here to say this person did this or did not do this. And that is actually kind of, I think, a unique aspect of the films that I put together. I want to be very honest, saying like, look, we think that this scenario is strange, but we're not particularly saying that this person did these things, but it's likely they probably did these things.
Yeah, and that's kind of an area I'm going to get into quickly. Just like you're saying, there's this aura around the Clinton family that if you cross them, it's possible that you will end up dead. It's a famous hashtag, of course, on Twitter, Clinton body count and stuff like that. Did you find any roadblocks or scare tactics being used when you guys were making Clinton Cash? Did you feel like, oh my God, this actually could be real, that they're going to come after me? Anything like that at all?
In the context of Clinton Cash, no. The project was made, kind of off the radar. But here's the thing: this is not my first Clinton project. I have actually made another film many years earlier in 2007, 2008, called Hillary the Movie, with Citizens United. And so that project actually was more frightening. And, we interviewed a lot of people, from Billy Dale and a number of other people who had been directly affected by the Clintons. Clinton Cash was just a single interview with Peter Schweizer, basically kind of assembling the research that he spent many, many years putting together about how the business and the foundation function. Whereas the earlier project was more about, remember, you were closer to the Clinton presidency at that time. It had only been, say, 7 years since he had been out of office. A lot of things were still fresh in people's minds. And so in the early project, interviewing people, these were more personal stories. And on the personal side, there were some very frightening things that came up during those filmings. Now, myself, I'm a documentarian, so I'm just interviewing people, and they're the ones who actually, and I always say this: the people on the screen are the ones who are the brave ones, not me. I'm collecting their stories and putting together, but these people are willing to sit down and to communicate things that may put them at risk. I think by the time we did Clinton Cash, this was the culmination of the Clinton dynasty. This is what they had aimed to do for for decades. This was it. This was the Super Bowl. And they lost.
Yes, that was even a surprise to me, and as the results started rolling in, I felt as though Trump was my guy all of a sudden, and I did not vote for him in that election. I did not vote for her, of course, but I remember watching it on an airplane. I had CNN. We had a seat between us with no one in. I had CNN and Fox on, and it started looking more and more like, holy shit, she's gonna lose. And I was elated. I could not believe it. I woke my wife up and said, look at the people on CNN. They're about to start crying. They're about to cry, it looks like. And then you can see the ones on Fox like, oh my God. Uh, just as an aside, do you remember where you were when those results were rolling in and what you thought?
Yes, it was interesting because I was in my apartment in Lower Manhattan with some friends just watching the returns. And, by early in the evening when Virginia had not gone immediately into the Clinton column, eventually it would, but the fact that it didn't go so quickly indicated that there was clearly something off about how this was going to happen. Because I mean, in the early parts of the day, of course, everyone said, "Oh, it's a 98% chance that Clinton wins the
Mm-hmm.
presidency." And look, here's the thing, right? The thing that kills a presidential election, and you see it time after time, is simply arrogance. The arrogance, the assumption. And it's ironic talking about that against, say, someone like Donald Trump, who's like basically the embodiment of arrogance. But it's a different kind of arrogance. The arrogance that look, we saw it in George H.W. Bush when he ran against Bill Clinton. The assumption that, oh, who's this guy from Arkansas? I'm going to crush him. He didn't pay him any attention. He got wiped out. And then, of course, you saw it with Hillary against Barack Obama in 2008 during the primary.
Yeah.
Taking the opponents for granted. It seems to be a thing with the Clinton, at least Hillary Clinton. Bill's a little different. That they take things for granted. They take Michigan and these states for granted, and they got quite a walloping. And look, had she stepped into some of these states, she would have been
Mm-hmm.
the president.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very simple. It's very simple. It's not a hard equation. You just can't assume that everyone's just going to show up all the time. And I think Trump, for all of his strange activities and whatever, played the field better. He just did it better than she did.
You said you were in Lower Manhattan. In those years, did you ever feel a sense, like maybe at a social function or some kind of cocktail party, that if me, M.A. Taylor, said, "Hey, I'm the guy that made Clinton cash," that they would just look at you, like you've got three heads?
Literally all the time.
Okay.
I mean, it's still now. I mean, like, this is there. I didn't do a lot of press for Clinton Cash in the early days, primarily because it's just a very, very touchy topic. It was during an election, and you don't know who's going to win, and so I think many years later. It's interesting to look back because I do run into people from time to time who said, "Oh, I've seen the movie and I really liked it," which is always shocking to me. But a lot of people liked it. A lot of good reviews came in from both sides of the aisle. Because again, the film, it was not a typical, the Clintons are bad because they're bad, right?
Right.
It's more of these are the things that happen. They are probably not good, but this is for you to decide, and like this is the beauty of someone like a Peter Schweitzer, who again provided the research. He is thorough. He is liked by the New York Times and a lot of other people because the research is, if it's not there, he's not going to say it's there. There's no assumptions made. There's none of these kinds of things are kind of made. It's one of those things where, if the facts aren't there, we're not going to say that they are, and I think that's how the film functions. And the film it's very nicely made. And I think people saw that at the time. Things have changed, I'm sure, now because everybody's very upset about everything. So,
What are your thoughts on what's happened to New York City and New York State, I guess, so to speak, but certainly New York City? What's going on up there with everything, and what are your thoughts on that?
well, look, New York is a tragedy. I mean, it is an absolute tragedy. New York City is historically a amazing place, right? I mean, look, it's the Dutch show up, then the English show up. George Washington fights the British in Brooklyn and then steals away to Manhattan. I mean, the history and kind of the importance of New York City, not just for the birth of America, but for the development of, say, the economy and these other things. is significant, and all the things that have happened there, and it represents the achievement of mankind, the skyscrapers, the early electricity, the subways, the bridges, all these things, right? And so it is America's, gem of it's what the future was supposed to be, and it represents all these things. And to see the city over the last nearly decade be pushed into essentially back into the late 80s, it's very similar to the Dinkins years again.
Mm-hmm.
Except look, Mayor Dinkins, and when he took over in 89, he did inherit a bad city. The city had already been in decline for many years. The murder rate was up to 2,500 people, 2,200 people this year and that year. With de Blasio, he inherited a wonderful city.
Yeah.
Right. He inherited a city where the crime was so low, it was virtually unpreventable. He inherited a city where the economy was thriving. People were moving there. We had moved there during those years. And so in a lot of ways, whereas I'm willing to let Dinkins slide for, his inability to manage a city that had already been out of control for decades, de Blasio had no excuse. He even knew that he had to keep, at least the crime down. And he did bring Bratton in the first couple of years, much to the chagrin of his progressive allies. They didn't like that, but he knew he had to keep the city, he had to keep it safe. And in the last couple of years, the safety has just completely come undone. And New York City is the kind of city where it has to be safe first for anything to thrive. Because if it's not safe, then there aren't people on the street, and there aren't stores and things like that, and there are not eyes on the street, and it just goes into a death spiral. I was there a week ago, and yes, the city is kind of coming back, but there's an eerie strangeness to it that's partially lots of businesses have gone out because of COVID, but it's only partially COVID. It's COVID and a bunch of bad policies. And so right. I think while a lot of people will say, oh, COVID destroyed New York City. Yes, COVID did damage, but all it did was accelerate what was already happening in the city. Had COVID not happened, the state of the city is still in decline. And I think the big issue is that in the 25, almost 30 years of restructuring of the city to be, the safest major city in America, there was a lot of infrastructural changes to policy and things like that. And in a lot of ways, de Blasio came in and undid those things. So, they got to get the crime under control, but there's a lot of damage done in social services and other things that are hugely problematic for the future of the city. Now, of course, the election of Eric Adams in his primary over Maya Wiley, I think, is a significant basically punch in the face to the progressive left, because this is the most progressive city, maybe besides San Francisco, but for the progressive left or to be basically shut out of the New York City mayor's race and elect a police officer and a former Republican to the mayoralty, I think it's the canary in the coal mine for some of these policies that have been running rampant in our major cities.
This ad is for all of the single men and women that listen to Counterflow. I've finally got a dating app that's really worth it, because I've got single friends. They show me these dating apps. There's a bunch of swiping left and swiping right, and then you end up going out with some hardcore leftist that's insane, and the date sucks, and you go nowhere, and it seems to be a giant waste of time. Well, that's why I have for you Drom, D-R-O-M. Above the O is the little umlaut, it's a Swedish word. Drom dating app is a values-based matching app. So if you're libertarian or conservative, if you've got lifestyle that's important to you, religion that's important to you, how to raise your children, if you want to homeschool, all of this stuff, you can now match up with someone who agrees with you. You can set your own deal makers and deal breakers. You could put in there, only show me people that are libertarian who want kids that want to homeschool them, something like that. Drom is a free new values-based dating app. So like I said, you pick the deal breaker, you pick the deal maker, and it will find you like-minded people that care about the same core values. It could be local or anywhere in the world. And check this out, this part's key in my opinion. It's video only. It's video profiles and video chats, no pictures, no texts. This creates a more human type vibe and reduces, let's say, the catfishing. I know some of you people out there have been victim to certain angles when you see a picture and you think, well, this should be a great date. And then you see them in person and it's like, wow, what angles were you fooling me with? This is all video. So there is no fooling, there is no catfishing. If you both like each other's video profiles, then you start video chatting. Once you're both ready to go on the date, Drom actually has a date planner to make the date planning easy. It lets you design your perfect match. There are no experts, match percentages, nothing like that. You pick exactly what you want. You only get those matches. If you don't find a deal breaker or deal maker that's important to you, you can actually add your own if there's not one in the selections they give you. So, guys, girls that listen to Counterflow, this is what you do. Go in your browser and type in drom.date/buck. That's drom, DROM.date/buck. Click the Apple or Android button and use the invite code BUCK to sign up. And good luck out there. Let me know how this works for you guys. I'm really excited to pitch this product. Let's get back to the show. You mentioned Citizens United. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you more about that, because the things that you worked on had basically played a role in this giant case that everyone has referenced since it happened. And so really quick, talk about that, the part that you played in it, and just kind of give a refresher for my younger audience on what Citizens United represents.
So, we made a movie in 2007 and 2008 on Hillary Clinton. And of course, we ran ads about the movie. And essentially, the FEC said you can't run any ads because it's within 100 days of a primary. And we sued them. And it went to the Supreme Court, and Judge Roberts said, look, if you could ban a movie, you could ban a book, it's a free speech issue, and then open it up to even actually a broader kind of argument, which would essentially be Citizens United versus FEC. And it hinged on, it's a free speech argument essentially on this film that allows corporations and things to spend money on their own behalf, hence creating something we know as super PACs. Now at the time, everyone said, oh boy, billionaires come in and buy the presidential election with super PACs and et cetera, et cetera. Now, look, it's been 11 years since the decision was passed. It's been longer since we made the movie. And frankly, billionaires have actually tried to buy the presidential election, have failed.
Yeah.
So that argument is debunked. And essentially it was a free speech case, and it changed a lot of election law. And allowed different kinds of money to enter into the political discussion. But again, in my opinion, money plays only a certain role in elections and how they run. Of course, on a presidential scale, it's such a large map that money plays a role, but there's a lot of other things that play roles as well. And so I think that it changed a lot of things. I think it did probably help change the political landscape during the Obama years. But people can make super PACs, corporations can make super PACs, and they can have a voice, and essentially gives them the same ability that unions have had forever.
Yeah, well put. I want to talk about Safeguard too, because I ended up, I guess I watched it after we initially met. And so now it's the furthest back in my mind of all of the ones I've watched of yours. But talk about the film Safeguard and what that's about.
So, and around the same time we came out with Riding the Dragon, we released a project on the Electoral College. And, the Electoral College is not a sexy topic. It's not like the Clinton Foundation or, Biden's China dealings or big tech creeping in. People go, well, who cares, right? The Electoral College, like, what is it? And it's interesting because a lot of people go, oh, well, people should know about the Electoral College. Like, why don't they, they should take civics classes. And yeah, they should. But look, you only have to think about this thing every 4 years for like 15 minutes, you know? So what's really interesting is we decided to do a project on the Electoral College to kind of discuss it in the context of a contemporary perspective. Because what we had been noticing is that there has been an assault on the Electoral College, primarily saying, "Oh, it's racist," and it just goes along with all of the forefathers are all racist, and that this is racist, and that let's get rid of the Electoral College. Um, and so we kind of outline basically a brief history of what it is and why it came about. But what we really get into is basically how by eliminating the Electoral College, you actually threaten minority rights. And that's kind of a big part of the project. A big part of the film is that, if you want to protect minorities, and this could be racial minorities, economic minorities, any kind of minority, sexual preference minorities, these minorities only can thrive in a system that gives voices to a minority group. And the Electoral College, by design, is designed to do just that. Now, of course, you've had two elections in the 21st century that awarded the presidency to the person who did not win the popular vote. George W. Bush in 2000, of course, Donald Trump in 2016. And so in this century, people have wanted to get rid of it because of that. Because it did award these two people without the popular vote. But again, we get into the idea that, we are a constitutional republic. We are not technically a democracy, which seems to be everyone's, the democratic way, but that's not exactly how the founding fathers set it up. Because if we were a democracy, then, basically like, might makes right, 50 plus one. I mean, there's a lot of people don't realize how much they would be hurt, especially when you look at the demographics in this country.
Yeah.
If you have 16.8, percent African American voters, that is not a majority.
Right.
It's a minority. And so the Electoral College takes those numbers and empowers those people to have voices. And that's what we break down in the film. And it's interesting because in some ways, if you already know about the Electoral College, you say, yeah, okay, I get all this. If you don't know anything, it very carefully goes through and explains how it prevents billionaires from buying elections, a topic we've already touched on, how it prevents radical people from rising to the presidency. And it also breaks down this idea that the presidency itself, it's the executive branch, right? He's supposed to be the president for everybody. And in this last 100 years or so, the president has become more than the founding fathers had intended the president to be.
Yes.
This very partisan figure. The president doesn't make laws. He enables them. That's for Congress and Senate, those bodies to make those laws. So we get into that as well. And it's really important. It would be better if the executive branch just was more as intended in just the CEO of the country, essentially.
Yes. It's got way too much power. I liked the angle you guys took was something I call attacking the left from the left, because clearly it is the left that's preaching to get rid of it. But I thought it was unique for you guys to show, well, then you're harming minorities when you do things like that. And so did you get feedback from people on the left that it changed their mind, or have you heard anything like that?
Well, it's funny because, the film predominantly features a lot of Democrats as, it literally opens with Barack Obama. I mean, Barack Obama winning the presidency is the system working, right?
Yes.
And or John F. Kennedy winning the Electoral College. There's no John F. Kennedy without the Electoral College. So the thing is like a lot of these kinds of, we actually had certain people from the right who were actually more upset because we gave credit where credit's due. And again, this is my thing. Like, I think Howard Dean is a genius. We say it in the movie. His 50-state strategy turn Colorado blue. I mean, he is a visionary when it comes to running a 50-state strategy, and he has put the Electoral College, in my opinion, firmly in the Democrat side. The Electoral College helps in a lot of ways the Democrats more than it helps Republicans just by sheer numbers. And so I think the thing is I really strove to highlight those points and saying, look, just because you're right or left, you got to give credit to the people who actually look at the system and understand it and then engage. Because look, Howard Dean making a 50-state strategy, he's not leaving states out, right? Unlike everybody else is saying, oh, we don't need this state because we already won it.
Yeah.
Last time I checked, that's what made Donald Trump president in 2016.
Yes, indeed. Let's talk about the creepy line, because it almost now when I watch it, unfortunately, it's so, well, yeah, that's what we're living in right now. Like you said, it came out a few years ago, but it keeps getting worse. I almost feel like the creepy lines moved quite a bit even since you made the creepy line. And I've got this theory where I can see government almost, in combination with corporations and big tech, playing on this line that some of us in the libertarian or right-wing circles say, well, government's incompetent, they can't do anything. Aha, that's where the big tech companies come in, and we're going to have to give these certain duties that government has to some of these tech companies now because they're going to do it a lot more efficient. I don't know. These are things I think about when I'm trying to sleep at night sometimes. But talk about the creepy line and then kind of where we're at now. And because I assume if you made it today, it unfortunately would be a little creepier than it was then.
Well, it's interesting because, what you're saying is not wrong at all. In fact, at the end of the film, we highlight that this is classical fascism. This is big government merging with big business to control the people, right? That's the classical. It's not fascism as we see, from Antifa.
Right.
Classical fascism is something actually much worse. And the thing is like, if you look at COVID, what's really interesting about the COVID pandemic is that who were the first people to rush in and say, hey, we got this, right? It was big tech.
Yep.
And what's interesting about this, we did the film in 2018 and it had its run through 2019. And of course we went into 2020 and then we had the pandemic. And what's interesting is at that time during the pandemic, again, being in New York City at the time, we were locked down, right? We couldn't go up. We couldn't do anything. I mean, you might be able to go outside, but you couldn't go to restaurants. You couldn't see your friends. You couldn't work. There was nothing you could do. And so the entirety of our life and our ability to live became reliant on big tech. I mean, we're on Zoom right now, right? We all had to get Zoom. We all had to get broadband. We all had to go all these things that we used before, but they weren't particularly enabled to the ability they are now.
Right.
And so between the fact that you had, Google stepping in saying, hey, government, we got you. We're going to do contract tracing. We're going to make this app that does a thing and blah, 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 blah. Right. And the government being like, yeah, it's great because we don't know what we're doing,
Right.
And then on top of the fact, look, there were benefits. Like clearly the internet is 1,000 times better. Like, we can all work from home now. But it is a double-edged sword. All technology is a double-edged sword. And so all of the bad things that, say, Google and Facebook were already doing was accelerated because of COVID. It was accelerated because the government was not prepared. And look, here's the thing, right? You take like the CDC, like they have like one job. They have one job. One job is to prepare for this moment. And to this day, they're still not entirely prepared. Right? It's changing all the time and all these kinds of, the only thing that's really solid is, guess what? Big tech, right? They're solid. They're dependable. They provide things for us. They entertain us. I mean, look, we're all locked in our apartments. What are we doing? We're watching Netflix. We're watching Amazon. We're literally, all of New York City was kept alive because of Amazon delivery. How else were you going to get anything? You couldn't get anything. Unlike other places where you can get in a car and drive somewhere, we don't have that luxury in certain cities, and definitely not in New York City. So, I think when we started with the creepy line, we specifically wanted to focus on something that had not been focused on, and that was, can big tech influence an election, right? We knew there were privacy issues. We knew there were some censorship issues, not like today, but there at the time there were here and there. And of course, due to the 2016 election, there had been a lot of cracking down on certain personalities, things you could say, and that's fine. There were plenty of people who were dealing with that. What people were not dealing with was if Google wants to modify the search engine and not allow a candidate to say something or allow a candidate to say something, does that shift votes? And we worked with a gentleman who had tracked the elections. He was a Democrat. He voted for Hillary Clinton. He is not no fan of Trump, that's for sure. And he's like, yeah, they were waiting the 2016 elections. And the film starts off with the theoretical. Well, what if this could happen? Is it possible? Right? And as you get deeper into the film, through a series of examples, we start showing kind of like, if Google says there's no bias, there's no bias. There's no bias in the search, but there is bias. There has to be bias. If I search for, what's the best dog food, the search engine biasly has to make two decisions. Number one, it has to look through billions of pages and has to select some. It's bias number one. The bias number two is it has to put them in an order, right? Now, here's the thing. That's a good bias. Like, yeah, I mean, the whole point I'm using this thing is because I don't know, and so what we were looking at is how does it make the decision to choose something, and how does it make a decision to put it in an order? And what we found was that order changes everything, right? Those decisions change everything. And a lot of, at the time we actually did, unlike Clinton Cash, I did a lot of press for the Creepy Line. And, the thing about the Creepy Line is it was still, we got some pushback from places like The Verge, saying like, oh, this is simplistic. And this is, why would Facebook care if you drink soda? And my thing is like, well, Facebook cares if you drink soda because they have big plans going forward with things like, they had started this idea of the Libra, their own cryptocurrency, which ultimately hit some bumps and was not shut down. We're just not hearing about it right now because they had bigger plans. And so I think the problem is towards the end of the Trump presidency, they were in a position where COVID was keeping everybody in their house. We all were relying on using their products. And that's to say that like I love their products, right? I mean, I use their products. I'm on a MacBook Pro. I got some headphones. I mean, we use these, but if they didn't work, we wouldn't use them, right? They work so well that our entire life is basically being determined by these products, And so I think that the fact that we can't, this whole Reagan line, trust but verify, that we can't verify how these technologies are affecting elections is hugely problematic. I mean, it's hugely problematic. And I think as we move forward, it will just get worse. And I think, whether you like Donald Trump or not, I think him being booted off Twitter terrified a lot of people. And I think it terrified people from both sides of the aisle. Look, I'm not saying the guy is like, you don't want him to marry your daughter or, but like the thing is like, the Taliban are on Twitter right now, and Donald Trump, a former president, is not. And I'm not saying he was like, exactly a gracious guy or even or great or anything. I'm saying that like all that aside, that is a tremendous amount of power for a company to have. And so it's I feel like what we did in 2018 was quasi theoretical, and then what we're seeing now is what we kind of theorized actually playing out, but playing out 100 times worse than anything we had imagined. Which tends to be the issue with these projects. We say, oh, what happens if it would be pretty crazy, and then 5 years later, it's like it's Armageddon. It's 100 times worse because we couldn't even imagine that it would get that bad. And in my opinion, it is that bad. I think it's terrible right now. I think big tech is has a lot of overreach. I think as the big kind of operating system guys start making their operating system subscription models and things like that, it's problematic. But again, look, I'm kind of in the minority of, like, say on the Parler issue, like I thought Apple actually has every right to boot them off their platform, and so I think it's a mixed bag.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are not separating these companies out. They're saying one big tech. You do have to deal with them individually. They're doing individual things that are unique to them. And right now, there's no oversight in how they're going to function or what they're going to do. And look, Google is a utopian company, and utopian companies terrify me to death.
Mm-hmm. Let me tell you guys about your one-stop shop for all things CBD related, and that would be PalomaVerdeCBD.com. That is PalomaVerdeCBD.com, where naturally they are a sponsor of this show. So there's a promo code, which is BUCK, B-U-C-K. If you use that over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com, you will get 25% off of your order. Everything over $75, that is. So that's the stuff I got to tell you up top. Now, I want to tell you, other than supporting this show, which I'm assuming you'd like to do, I'll tell you some other reasons why you should shop there. For one, they opened a brick and mortar store right before the government lockdowns happened, which basically wiped that part out. So they're online only now. So you got to feel for anyone that was a victim of government overreach, like the lockdowns, and that's what these guys were. But they're a really wonderful couple. They're very good people, very like-minded into this kind of same stuff, the weird stuff that we're all into. I can tell you that Carlos and Vanessa out of San Antonio are truly good people, and they're really hard workers. They put a lot into this business. There's a lot of personal touches, so that ought to entice you guys as well. I can tell you about some of the products. They've got the mint CBD tinctures. They've got all the CBD stuff. If you're thinking, do they have this? Yeah, they probably do. They've got CBD soft gels, CBD gummies. They've got the tinctures. Like I said, they've got salve stick. There's a sleep bundle to help you sleep with several things in that. They've got salve, and I bragged about this a lot, but I genuinely mean it. The CBD Cool Menthol Sports Cream is the best sports cream I've ever used. And I am not saying that just because they're sponsors. I actually mean it. Also, the pet treats, the dog chews. Guess who loves the dog chews? That would be Lux, my French bulldog. If you know anything about the French bulldog breed, once they're about 10 years old, they kind of limp around a little bit slower than they used to. Well, that was my dog, basically, up until I started giving him these dog chews and putting the pet CBD tinctures on his food every morning. And now he thinks he's like 2 years old again, which would be 14 years old, I guess, in dog years. But yeah, so he thinks he's a teenager. Anyway, I love that he loves that. And I love that these guys are sponsors. Like I said, they're great people. They want to help support this show, as do you. So, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, promo code BUCK, B-U-C-K at checkout, get you 25% off of everything over $75. Please give them a visit. It helps them, it helps me, and it helps my dog. What more could you ask for? Let's get back to the show. I watched Riding the Dragon yesterday, and I got excited quickly right off the bat. It said Steve Bannon's name in it. I'm correct in that, right? I'm remembering.
Oh, no, he was involved in Clinton Cash.
Is that what it was? Okay,
yeah,
I'm sorry.
Riding the Dragon was he's not involved. No.
Okay, well then, before we get to Riding the Dragon, do you know Steve Bannon?
I do.
And
yes.
Can you get him on this show? I love Steve Bannon, and my audience is probably chuckling at that because I bring him up quite a bit. But wow, okay, we'll talk offline. About Riding the Dragon, let's get into that. And I guess what I'd ask, you can talk about what it entails, but do you think Joe Biden is compromised?
Look, I think Joe Biden is a hugely problematic president. I think there's been no person who's run for president who has been vetted less than Joe Biden. I think I've been vetted more than Joe Biden. This guy sailed through the presidency. And look, here's the thing, right? If you asked me in 2020 or in the early 2020 or even late 2019, who is the most dangerous and probable candidate, I would have said Joe Biden. I'm on record saying Joe Biden, right? It wasn't any of these other people. It was Joe Biden. Joe Biden he's a legacy guy. He's one of the last Democrats that could win the Rust Belt states. I don't think the Rust Belt states want progressives, but they don't mind like classic Democrats, right?
Right.
And so, to me, he was the guy. Right. And the problem is, of course, is he's been in government for so long. And, when you hear about all of these things with Hunter in China, in some ways, I find it more disturbing than the Clintons. I think a lot of people compare the two camps. The Clinton camp and they're corrupt, and the Biden camp. They're very different. I think that the Clintons are smarter.
Yes.
I think I have a great deal of respect for the Clintons. They are truly amazing. I think their operations are more elegant. They're designed better. Their objectives are more understandable. I think the Joe Biden design, as we've seen, for things that have come out of, leaked off of Hunter's laptop and a number of other things, it's just a bunch of thugs. It's a bunch of low-level greedy thugs who, are just going to sell things out. And it doesn't matter if it's, there are deals that happen with Hunter that went against the Obama administration when Joe Biden was vice president.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a very kind of thuggish, low quality, low class operation. And, I don't know what state the president is currently. But I think it's dangerous. I think there is compromise aspects to this presidency. Look, the Chinese don't give $2 billion to somebody and not expect something in return. And so I think it's a very dangerous position to be in. And we're going to see what he's going to do, because things are going to happen over the next couple of years with China. It's inevitable. And so we're going to see what President Biden does, and I think my indications are that he will not particularly immediately side with them, but there's a lot of things you can do in the background to aid your enemy in the U.S. Political spectrum.
Yeah, that's your take was exactly what mine was. Watching it yesterday, after you guys started getting into his brother and his son and his sister. And I was left going, what a bunch of low quality kind of midwit, other than the fact that they have this power now, losers. And it seemed to me like they were all relying on Big Joe to kind of get some sort of power. And it's just a bunch of hangers on that are kind of unimpressive losers that now will have money and power because of Joe Biden.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, I spent many years studying Hillary Clinton, right? And people go, oh, well, they're from Arkansas and all they like is money and blah blah blah. No, it's different, right? I think the Clintons are endlessly fascinating, right? They're endlessly fascinating.
Yeah.
Their objectives are extremely complex. They are long-term planners. And they make mistakes, but not enough mistakes to get dinged. And what's crazy, right? If you really think about it, what's bonkers about the difference between Biden and Clinton is that in 2016, and really, I mean, look, for 40 years, Hillary Clinton has been getting assailed by, it's not just the right, it's by everybody.
Yeah.
There was a time in the 90s where the press was actually following through and asking questions. Because whether it's Billy Dale or was it Whitewater? I mean, all these things, these things came up in the news. Remember, these things. He was impeached. The press covered it. They might have liked him, but they still covered it. With this presidency, nobody's covering anything, and you actually do have evidence. Again, going back to we don't ever have the smoking gun with the Clintons because they are that good. We have circumstantial evidence. We have she showed up at this time and he showed up at that time, and some money was transferred, but you never saw the sleight of hand, right? With the Bidens, We have the actual emails. We have the actual things. We have all of it. We have the evidence. There's probably more evidence to prove these kinds of activities with Joe Biden and Hunter Biden than anybody, than mafia bosses that were taken down in the 90s. So like I think what's astounding is, they're going to do what they're going to do, and they're going to utilize the system to be corrupt, right? And look, it's not like a new story. It's not like, oh my goodness, they're the only ones who've ever done it. This happens a lot in Washington and in all governments of all sorts, with anyone with power. The thing that is astounding to me is that the press simply will not cover anything. I mean, anything at all. And, to me, I find that to be frightening. And of course you have, Twitter took down the New York Post.
Yeah.
I think it's
right.
the fifth largest paper in the country.
Yeah.
There we see big tech then stepping in to make sure that any voice of dissent is knocked out. And so what's crazy about it is I don't even think he's worth carrying the money for, or the water for. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it was different with the Clintons. The Clintons, again, he was going to be president. She was going to be president. There was a vision for what happened, for the new, the new kingdom that they were going to build. The Bidens aren't worth it. I don't understand why you would risk your reputation and things on a bunch of people who are just common thugs, and they're not very smart, and they're not very elegant, and they're not very interesting.
To keep Donald Trump out, you think was part of it?
Well, look, I mean, Donald Trump is a existential threat to so many entities and established entities, and so, clearly the thing is they wanted to get rid of him, and I think the thing is that the press felt bad because they gave him $2 billion worth of earned media in 2016, right?
Mm-hmm.
They gave him so much press. And then they pivoted during the presidency to assail him on a daily basis, which, look, here's the thing, right? In my opinion, fine, right? You're the president, like, suck it up, right? Like, that's what's going to happen. If you're in the public office, I started this interview with saying you deserve to be vetted. And it's going to be positive. It's going to be allies. It's going to be people who hate you. Like, if you're the president, you just got to deal with it, right? That's what you got to do, whether you like it or not. So like, there's no whining. You may like or dislike George Bush or Barack Obama, but like, they never sweated the press. They don't care, right? Because they're the president. They got a job to do. I think where it becomes complicated is the fact, I mean, look, even Barack Obama's, whiffs of the ball were covered. Benghazi was covered.
Yeah.
These things were covered. And you have what is a unprecedented press blackout, unlike anything we've ever seen. And, even with big tech, I mean, clearly big tech plays their part on what you can and cannot see. But here's the thing. It's easy to censor something if it's never written in the first place.
Yeah,
right. So I think to me that is coming out of the 2020 election cycle. Look, I'm not telling anyone who to vote for. I don't care. Right. My thing is like this, right? Like, you need to be vetted thoroughly, and you need all your decisions as a president need to be constantly monitored and vetted by the press. They're the last, whether we like them or not, they're the last kind of line of defense and letting the people know what's up. And I think that, everyone's like, oh my goodness, all these people are going to run to radical sources. Well, if everybody would just report what's happening, nobody would feel the need to run to radical sources, because they would be seeing what's reported. Yeah. I mean, look, there's no president who's going to do good all the time. I mean, maybe George Washington, right? Maybe that guy, he had a very high approval rating, but like, from that point on, from president number 2 on, it's rough. It's a rough job. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to do things that are going to upset people. You just got to grin and bear it, and the press needs to report it, warts and all.
What subjects are you looking at possibly taking on next, film-wise?
We want to look at a variety of different things. I mean, I think, again, New York has become a very interesting topic to look at. Of course, we just had Governor Cuomo resign, the Emmy Award-winning,
Yeah.
master of ceremonies resign. Again, there's a change that seems to be a backlash. You have Governor Newsom who's potentially getting recalled. So I think that we're looking at how things are changing, how things are adapting. Cancel culture is on the rise. There's a number, of my favorite shows and things that have been ruined by certain companies, who feel a need to put a message in them,
Yeah.
and it's not that I have a problem with messages, it's just sometimes, like, all the time is like,
Yes.
sometimes I just want to watch a good lightsaber battle and be done with it, and so
Right.
I think there are a lot of really good people out there who are covering a lot of these topics. We tend to look into more investigative stuff. So we have a couple projects that are in the works. We are looking at New York City and New York as a topic, as well as, to evaluate that. But yeah, for now, it's all being sorted out what we're going to do next.
Are you optimistic? You said there's a backlash possibly coming, and depending on what day of the week it is, sometimes people like myself and people in my circles are very black-pilled and pessimistic, and oh my God, things are getting worse and worse and worse. And then you see something like maybe if Gavin Newsom were to get recalled and actually lose, or Cuomo resigning, and just little chinks at the big machine's armor like that makes me sometimes white-pilled and kind of optimistic. Where are you in that dilemma?
It's interesting because, like, I am a extreme pragmatist, right? I make no assumptions, but the thing is that there is a system at play, and the system works if operated on properly. And the bad guys use the system all the time, and the good guys don't. And so, in my opinion, anything is really possible. I guess I'm kind of a futurist in a way. I think as evil as big tech is, it's also amazing, right? And these amazing things that we get, whether it's the splitting of the atom, which gives us nuclear energy, or nuclear bombs. I mean, that is the perpetual, world we live in. And I think the thing is like, for example, my wife and I were driving recently. This is kind of an interesting kind of breakdown that we kind of thought about. We said, hey, look, how many people live in the top 20 major cities in America? And it turns out there were like 32 million people in the top 20 cities, right? Which means that if there's only 32 million people, and that's men, women, and child, and you have 160 million people voting, the thing is that there's a lot of power outside the cities. People just haven't woken up to the fact that, like, they have the numbers. And I'm not saying it's Republican or Democrat. It could be anything. I mean, anything. So the thing is like the system works when people wake up and realize that they have the power to work with, to change things. And so, otherwise, what would be the point, to make a film like Clinton Cash? And, it's you're entering into a dangerous scenario, to kind of try to bring the truth to people. And people like yourself and everybody who goes out and does these things are critical to carrying the message, to activating people. And look, like I tell people, like when we do these things, I am trying to defend liberty for all people, for people on the left to have their opinions and people on the right to have their opinions. Everybody has a right to their opinion. The problem is certain people are getting censored right now.
Right.
And at the end of the day, here's the thing. This is the fact of the matter, right? Big tech is favoring the left right now.
Mm-hmm.
But big tech favors big tech. That's what they favor. And this is what they favor today. And if they choose to change that tomorrow and they want to favor someone else, that's what they'll do. And so nobody should be sitting there saying, oh man, I'm so glad those guys are getting canceled. Or I'm so glad those guys are getting, this is, if anything makes me pessimistic, it's actually in that space. Because I think the people who are celebrating the cancel culture of getting, people on the right or whoever canceled, they're just as much a threat have a threat on them as
Yeah.
anybody else. They just don't realize it yet. They just happen to be, the vehicle that these entities are using to push whatever their mission is. So I think at the end of the day, overall, I'm optimistic about the people of America. I'm issues or anything like that. But I do think that, I think that things could change. I think we've seen them change. I think the trajectory of mankind is more positive than ever. I think more people are out of poverty than at any point in history. I think people are more wealthy. They have clean water. They live longer. I mean, in the trajectory of history, we are better off now than we were 100 years ago. And it's up to us to preserve that liberty so that we can continue getting better 100 years from now.
All right, plug your work. I know it's a different place where we can see each film, so kind of let them know where they can see the movies and anything that you have on social media if you want that to be out there in this space. But anything you'd like.
I think yes, Clinton Cash is on iTunes. Safeguard is on Amazon. I think Riding the Dragon is on YouTube for free on Blaze TV. It's one film or it's 6 separate parts if you want to watch individual nutty deals. And The Creepy Line is also on Amazon. So you can go watch these films if you have Amazon Prime. You can watch them. You can leave comments. You can say you hate them, you love them. But this is the beauty of a film: is it lasts forever. We make these films. I tell everybody, watch with an open mind. You might learn something. I mean, look, God knows I have to watch a bunch of stuff that I hate every day. So I'm a comic book nerd. So I get to watch all the things I love, basically burned down and crushed into dust.
Yes.
But I still watch them in the hope that they'll be better. And so I would say at least have as open-minded of a mind as I do.
Excellent. Any social media where they can follow you, or do you kind of keep that separate from some of this?
I don't do a lot of social media, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I mean, primarily, this is the irony of it. Is because again, you have when we started going after big tech, we couldn't do regular advertising; they wouldn't let us. So we used radio and podcasts and things like that. Look, like I said, if they build a bigger mousetrap, we're going to find a way to come up the works. I mean, that's what you just have to do. And so, people, it's like a Jurassic Park. Life will find a way, freedom will find a way, people's voices will find a way. And the bigger the system gets, the more difficult it will be to turn that ship to snuff out these voices.
Yeah. Well put. That was a good way to end this thing. M.A. Taylor, thank you so much for being here on Counterflow.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. I hope you enjoyed that chat with my pal M.A. Taylor. The housekeeping that I always do here at the end, you should know it by now, but just in case, go and subscribe to our YouTube page. This podcast that you're listening to, the video format's up there on YouTube. Just search Counterflow with Buck Johnson. Subscribe. Like I've told you, we do live streams now there, and they do not end up on this podcast format. They don't go to your podcast app that you're listening to this on. There are just live streams that are only on our YouTube page. So go check it out. The Telegram group's going strong. If you've got that app, search Counterflow with Buck Johnson. And I've had a few new Patreons lately, and I'm not a good salesperson, so I never talk about that. But if you see the Counterflow podcast website, counterflowpodcast.com, it's got other links on there to my social media stuff, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and it does have the link to the Patreon. You can become a monthly donor if you really like this show. I'm not good at selling that because it's not in my nature, but I will tell you this: when I get these notifications that someone's upped their pledge or that someone becomes a new donor to the Patreon program, to me basically through the Patreon program, it does strike me as amazing. It's really nice to know that what I do here on this show means enough to people that they would give me money every month. And that's really, I mean, you can give $1. There's no floor on it, I should say. I guess you can give a penny if you want. I don't know. But whatever the case is, you guys that do that, Sincerely, thank you very much. And if that's something you'd like to do, go ahead and do it on the Patreon link there on my Counterflow podcast web page. And when you do, I'll send you a little thank you note, of course. And what else do we got? Sometimes it feels like you should be black-pilled because of all the craziness that's going on. There's a lot of good news happening at local levels, a lot of school board stuff going on where angry, smart, and motivated parents are going down to these school board meetings and demanding that they do not make the kids wear masks. And a friend of mine that listens to this show was just part of one of those victories here in Texas. And so that is happening all over. So there are some white pills to be had out there. I wanted to end with that happy note. And I think that's all we got, guys. Follow me on Twitter @BuckRebel. And we will talk to you next week. Have a good one.
You get split in fucking half. I call him the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.
This has been the Counterflow Podcast, a part of the Renegade Media Network.